All right, it's Mattthew Holt, out and about in San Francisco. This is David Vivero. He's the CEO of Amino, which is a pretty new entrant into the physician search space. David, thanks for hosting me. We're here in your rather palatial office, which is good fun to see. This shows what excessive venture capital will buy you in a high-rent district, but soon to be filled up with more people, I'm sure. Okay, so let's start off. You've been knocking around in technology for a while, and now you decided that many people know that I think that physician search is about the hardest problem to crack in health technology. So why physician search? Why healthcare and why physician search?
It's a hard problem, but it's also an important problem. I was at Zillow before. I was an executive in the consumer internet space, and I had left Zillow after selling my previous company to them. I had left, as most people do, and pursued Cobra and was on my own. When I was looking at Cobra, it was relatively expensive at the time, so in 2013 I applied for health insurance, was denied because I had a pre-existing condition. And so I went through this whole process of having to find a new network and a new doctor. And over the course of a few weeks, while my seat was still warm, really there, I had this idea that being an individual, a consumer in healthcare was a pain. And so over the course of the 2 years that followed, I reconnected with people that I'd built my last company with. And we decided to embark on this journey to help everyone make confident decisions about their healthcare using as clear a picture as possible, which is very similar to the ethos that I had had in consumer real estate before that.
So you had the problem which I guess got cured by the Affordable Care Act of not being the pre-existing condition. That part got cured. So you decided to go. In some ways, a lot of people are working at that insurance front end. In fact, at Health to Know we have some challenges still going from Robert Johnson to curing that. But this provider issue is a really thickening, maddening issue. And one of the things about it is that there's a lack of good information about providers. That you lack of basic information about who's on, who's doing what, and then down to the next part, which is where I think you've tried to dive in with Amino, is to how to figure out what the best fit would be. So tell me a bit about your approach to how you've been doing it.
Our approach is we interviewed 50,000 consumers before launching our product. So
you did it one by one yourself, I'm sure.
That's right, absolutely. So just flyers on the street. No, so we used a bunch of technologies to help us speak to that many people because we really needed to understand what the actual consumer health experience was. And the things that we learned was that people really wanted to have access to facts. They wanted to make decisions on the basis of facts, not opinions, and certainly on the basis of volume. So the reason that you actually speak to a friend of yours to be able to understand which doctor to choose is because you're looking for an unbiased, source of information, and you can trust that person to give you that recommendation. So by far and away, we spoke to consumers. They said the largest way that they find out about a doctor is still talking to a friend or family. And then after that, there's a few other resources. But the reason they go to that is because they're looking for something unbiased where they know for certain that the person they're speaking to got that treatment. And so our approach at Amino is to give someone as personal and as data-driven and unbiased an experience in finding a doctor, which we think is a unique approach and one that's resonated well since we launched.
So let's talk a bit about this, because there are a number of people, a number of other companies out there doing different things and different approaches to sort of ranking and rating doctors and helping you search for them, and you're not the first in that space. But you've actually taken this to like an extreme in terms of that volume thing and looking at more attributes by going after some data sets and then presenting, so you're like basically a data company with a doctor search front end on the top. Tell us a bit about what you've done in that area.
This approach is hard. In order for someone to feel confident making a healthcare decision, not slightly informed, but confident is a higher bar. And therefore our agenda here is to give people a clear picture that's based on as much data as we can get our hands on. We were probably the first company to have the level of commercial data to make available to consumers. Certainly we're the first company to make an application like ours available. We're definitely the first company to take data from Medicare that is 100% of Medicare. And you combine those data sets, which is 5 billion commercial claims over the last few years, covering 188 million people. You add to that another 50 million or so on Medicare and what's going on with Part A and Part B and Part A, B, and D, and you get as full a picture as you can make. So our approach works for all practicing physicians. It covers every zip code and every type of specialty, and it covers about 1,000 different health topics. And so to make someone feel confident making a healthcare decision, you want to make them feel like they made the best possible decision with the information they had. And despite the fact that there have been resources that support this over the last decade or so, when you interview enough consumers, they still feel like they need to just call a friend because that's the best they can do, and I think we can do better.
All right, so let's take a look at what that looks like in action. We're going to do a little demo here that I've had you prompted. But so this is the front end that people will see, and we'll just whiz it on the screen here. I hope it looks pretty good.
So Amino.com is free. It's available for everyone, whether you're uninsured, on Medicare, Medicaid, commercially insured, et cetera. And it's a search box, really. It starts out with what's ailing you. So you wouldn't come to Amino.com to self-diagnose or to get treated, but to the extent that you had a general idea of what you needed treatment for, Amino is a great place to find that information.
We're starting you're pregnant today, right?
And we're going to look at for a pregnant woman on our product. And so you just come to our search box, and we can support all sorts of different related topics. We have fuzzy spelling and matching and synonyms, et cetera. Pregnancy is one of those ones that we think is really powerful because finding a doctor to be your partner through your pregnancy is something that is a very significant healthcare decision and one where there's not really a lot of data. So the first card we ask is based off of this idea of personalization. Every time you come to Amino, we give you a stack of cards that is the equivalent of an interview for each of our users. They tell us that they're a 35-year-old female. They tell us generally where they're located, which will have an impact on what locations we recommend. How far are you willing to travel? For something like a cancer treatment, you'd probably be willing to travel a little farther than an allergist, but we'll put in 10 miles right down the middle. Health insurance, we support most major health insurance plans. We'll pick United Healthcare. And then in certain treatments, people care about whether it's a male or female doctor. In this case, we'll just state no preference. And so we take our data on the 900,000 doctors that are in our database, the 188 million people's histories, and we try to give someone a sense for who has experience that suits the needs of that user. So I'm a 35-year-old female. Which doctors have seen a lot of 35-year-old females for pregnancy? And then what you'll see here in the top left is this explanation of what we call a decision factor. And for pregnancy in particular, we report on C-section rates. So if you were someone who wanted to have a vaginal childbirth instead of a C-section, picking a doctor that takes your case into account and is more likely to give you a C-section or less likely may have an impact on your actual outcome. So I'll go to someone like Lisa Everson here. This is an OB-GYN in San Francisco. And we can see that primarily your match is calculated on the basis of the number of patients that we believe that Dr. Everson has treated within your cohort of age, sex. In this particular case, it's obviously clear that it's female, and their practice. And then also we surface something like a C-section rate. And what's powerful about the way that Amino has approached it is that we have biostatisticians, machine learning people, et cetera, here who can help us do risk adjustment models. So we look at the specific patient panel of a doctor and say, well, they treated this many people with twins, this many people with bleeding during their pregnancy, gestational diabetes, et cetera. You create a score that's a predicted rate of their C-section, and then you tell us actually what their actual rate was. So in this particular case, Dr. Everson operated about a third of the time or so that we would have predicted for her unique set of patients. The last thing you can do with Amino is you can book an appointment. So on any practicing doctor in America, just click the book appointment button, and that fills the screen here with another set of questions. And you can just say, I'm free mornings before 11, full name, date of birth, insurance company, so here you get more specific with us, mobile phone number. And then what's nice about this is that you don't need to pick up the phone, deal with whether they accept your insurance or not. You don't need to deal with any of the back and forth. All this is confirmed via text message, and then we check in with you after the appointment to see how it went.
Great. So I like the approach. Very, very interesting. Sort of lightweight on the front end, very data heavy, obviously, on the back end.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot more you could do with the claims data and other information sources. You're going to go that way. This is great. Plans for the future in terms of other types of data that you're going to surface to try and influence to help with that decision.
What defines Amino is confident decision making. So what you need to ask yourself to understand what's on our agenda is how can we bring data plus a lot of work to make an interface that lets you understand what it means so that you can make a confident decision. So right now it's about picking doctors, but obviously we also take our facilities into account. We're making treatment selections about this treatment path versus that. And so our approach is to help people feel like they got all the information they could in a very data-driven, personalized way so that they walk away from our product feeling like they know they made the best possible choice. We make a lot of choices in healthcare, and I think that's probably the roadmap, is thinking about what choices do we make and how can data be used to help.
So in terms of distinguish yourselves, go back to those other players in this space. You mentioned, over the last 10 years, you've got the health grades and the vitals and the better doctors and a number of others who in this space, not to mention the plans themselves having their own versions of these, not always the most successful. If you're talking about confidence around decision making, how do you distinguish yourselves from how those other players are going?
We've focused on a few things that really create a unique offering for consumers. First is this data-driven approach. So we have amassed this data, we continue to bring more of that data together, and we want to go beyond claims and add as much data as we can so that you're not doing it based off of any advertising program or just a luck of the draw alphabetically, which is in some cases how people find out about their doctor. And so our approach is to use that data. Second thing is that we don't have advertising on the site. We really focus on making sure that the information you're using is solely based on these facts and not based on that influence. And the last thing is, frankly, you should be using as many resources as you can as a consumer to get as confident as you can about making your healthcare decision. Our hope is that if you want to focus on outcomes or on volumes or other data-driven, highly personalized approaches, you'll come to Amino, and we've seen that that's what people are reacting to.
All right. Finally, a couple of questions about the business. You raised $7 million a couple of years ago, but were quiet about it. You from Excel, I guess people you knew before, prior life, and just raised another 13. And sort of come out of stealth with that. You've got a nice little publicity about that, but you're in as you said, a crowded marketplace, a lot going on, a lot of different venues for people to get this information. How are you going out and making yourselves known to the wider public?
It's actually fairly straightforward. We first focus on building a great product. So we are obsessive about calculating how likely our users are to recommend us to other people. For us, if you're learning about your doctor at the kitchen table from your aunt or your cousin, we'd love for that aunt or cousin to talk about the fact that they used Amino, and then it gave them a very personal recommendation, but they understand what went into it, and maybe they recommend to you using Amino instead of seeing a particular doctor, knowing that there's differences in people's insurance and in what their needs are. So that's number one. The second is just being available when people need doctors. And so we're doing tons of work to make sure that when people are diagnosed or when they need treatment, that we are there. And that's either through focusing on search or partnerships or working with the media so that people know that there's an option if you want to make a data-driven answer. And so you can see maybe in December, or I guess it was in November, we released our C-section report, which looked at this specific outcomes measure, and we reported C-section rates by zip code. And we allowed any woman in America to use our models of what drives a C-section, which is based on 4 million deliveries in the US. We allowed them to use that model in order to see their probability of C-section. So as you said, the data can be used in a lot of different ways, and what we want people to understand is that if you want to make a data-driven decision, Amino is the place to go, and there's lots of ways for us to communicate that.
All right. Finally, the business itself, you probably haven't announced yet. You're not charging. You tell us what you're not charging for, and tell us what you will be charging for. I assume the answer is nothing yet, but there are ideas there.
That's right.
We've heard a lot about the unicorps, the nuclear winter of fundraising that's coming up, and the rest of it. Obviously, you raised a bit. You've got a bit in the bank, but at some point you have to think about how you are going to generate some cash out of this. Most people are either going for a consumer play straight or working with industry. Where do you think you'll end up?
We're exploring all of our various tacks that we can take over the course of the next few years. The things that we have committed to, for example, are what we're not going to do. For example, doctors and hospitals are not paying to put their names at the top of the list or to tweak the results. That's important to us. We think that's important to consumers. You also are not seeing drug advertising and other advertising on our site, which I think reduces the ability to really make a decision based off of the data. Our goal is to build a revenue model that we think enhances the consumer's experience and allows them to, get better more easily. So whether that's working with, all sorts of different parties who are part of that experience, we're going to figure that out. But our goals are probably driven by those values more than anything right now. And we luckily have very patient investors who realize the size of opportunity, and they're willing to wait for us as well.
Great. I'm speaking with David Vivero. He is the CEO of Amino, a brand new and exciting entrance in physician search. Thanks, David.